Hello there, my name is Clement Igu. You are on to the Benue State e-learning virtual education center, Besavich, centered here in Makodi. This is part of the tertiary education lecture series, and we're presenting on educational research methods, the rudiments of research in education, part one of this series. Educational research refers to the identification of a problem in education and the scholarly effort made to solve it. Some of the attempts are expository in nature, that is, they bring out a problem presented to the public, and they're meant to help subject the problem to further research. An expository research is descriptive in nature mostly, and it makes use of frequencies, percentages, graphs, means and standard deviations, and so on, while further research may involve the use of higher statistical methods like the t-test, correlational coefficients, regression, ANOVA, and ANCOVA to explain the phenomenon that is under study. Typically, educational research deal with quantitative and numerical data, and this data could be primary or secondary. Hence, it is said educational research is said to be empirical in nature. The scientific approach of educational research is summarized in the next chart that you'll be looking at. The chart presents the identification of the problem, where you have it spread out into the delimitation of the variables. Then you have the scope of the study. We also have the literature review, and then we have the design of the study. Under design, we have the research methods, we have the instrumentation, we have the population, then you have the area of the study. Under that instrumentation, you have things that you have the questionnaire, you have checklists, and then you have tests as well. Then from the population, you can get your sample, then the sampling strategies first, the sampling techniques, then under sampling techniques, you can have the sample itself. Then from the area of study, you can get the schools, and from the schools, you get your respondents. From the respondents, you now get the statistical methods that you will now, from that data, which you will now use in analyzing the data. And now this now connects back to the objectives of the study. And the objectives of the study are now, they now determine the research questions and the research hypothesis. And from that, with those statistical methods are now related in such a way that once the analysis is done, it can now be interpreted to get the discussion of findings in relation to the literature that has been reviewed. And that leads to conclusions and then finally into recommendations of the study. But let's go back to the limitation of the variables. Now, the variables could be categorized into psychosocial, affective, cognitive, or curriculum implementation, or teaching methods, or what is also called the pedagogical methods. Now, under psychosocial variables, we have things like family problems of the respondents, have issues that have to do with depression, issues that have to do with anxiety, substance abuse, sexual abuse, and violence. Under affective issues or variables, you have variables like attention, relevance, satisfaction, confidence, and attitude of the learners. Then other cognitive variables, you have performance, achievement, retention, and understanding. If you look at curriculum implementation, they will have the teaching methods. We have cooperative teaching method, ICT integration, project method, laboratory method, and the use of heuristic. And all of these variables, they can be taken two or more at the same time. You can test or do a study that has to do with relevance and achievement, confidence and retention, satisfaction and understanding. You look at substance abuse and how it affects students' performance. You can look at the integration of an ICT teaching method and how it can now affect performance or achievement or understanding, as the case may be. And those teaching methods can also trigger satisfaction, they can trigger attention, and all of these are tested when research is done. Also, the variables could be studied as a form of association, or they could be studied as a cause or effect. When we looked at those variables in the past, we were talking about variables like attitude and attention. So if you look at attitude and attention, for example, we can see if there is an association between attitude and attention. It's not clear which one is affecting the other. Attitude can affect attention, and attention also can affect attitude. So in which case, we'll be looking at association of these two variables. We can look at the association between chemistry performance and physics performance, or chemistry achievement and physics achievement, where it is not clear which influences the other directionally. We can also look at the cause and effect implications of two variables. When you talk about cause, one is causing the other to act in a certain way, in which case the cause is referred to as the independent variable and the effect becomes the dependent variable. Here, the outcome of one depends on another. For example, relevance can cause an improvement in the achievement, and in which case relevance is now the independent variable, while achievement is the dependent variable in mathematics, and it may depend on the relevance of the content to the learner. Also, there are intervening variables which researchers use in their studies, and these intervening variables are things like gender and location, in which case the intervening variables are nominal variables, such that it is not correct, it is not statistically correct to calculate or to perform any statistical analysis on gender and location itself as a variable. It only intervenes in what might happen to the other variables, and they help in establishing the effect or otherwise of the main variables that are under study. So if you look at the study on achievement and retention, or attitude and achievement, for example, you see if gender can now be an intervening variable which shows that maybe male and female students are performing in a certain way, or male and female students are acting in a certain way, or have an attitude in a certain subject area. Now, the objectives of the study are always stem from the variables of the study themselves. The objectives of the study are stated in a broad sense or general sense. Then they are made specific by the researcher. Now, the broad objective may be stated to investigate the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement. While we want to go specific on those objectives, the researcher can now delimitate those objectives specifically to state that it is to investigate the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement. And then the second objective could be the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement among male and female students. You will notice that in this case, we have introduced the intervening variable, where the relationship between mathematics and chemistry is now seen to see how male and female students, whether there is a difference between them, whether the mathematics and chemistry achievement is different amongst male students, or there's an association between maths and chemistry amongst male students, or there is also that same kind of association between chemistry and mathematics achievement amongst the female students. Usually, from the research objectives, we can get research questions. And the research questions from those objectives could be that what is, research question 1, what is the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement? And this relationship could be positive, it could be negative, it could be weak, it could be medium, and it can be strong. Research question 2 would be, what is the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement amongst male students only now? Research question 3 would now be, what is the relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement amongst female students? Now, from those research questions, we can now have a hypothesis. Sometimes you have a one-to-one mapping between research questions and a hypothesis, but it's not always the case, even though that is advised. Now, hypotheses refer to assumptions that are made based on research questions. If there are 3 research questions, for example, and 3 hypotheses, like I've said before, that would be a one-to-one mapping. And we assume in education that those relationships do not exist. Now, hypothesis 1 from those research questions could be that there is no significant relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement. Hypothesis 2 would be there is no significant relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement among male students. Hypothesis 3 would be there is no significant relationship between mathematics and chemistry achievement among female students. Note the key word there is significant. And significant here denotes the degree of accuracy or confidence interval that is set at 0.05 level of confidence or 95%. What that means is that 95% of the findings are going to be, to some extent, correct or accurate or without some form of impurities. We shall return to the confidence interval at a later stage of this series. Now we go back to the scope. Having looked at the objectives, research questions, and hypotheses, there has to be scope. And scope in educational research is in twofold. You have the geographical scope and you have the content scope. In geographical scope, This is the location of the study, which could be a local area, a council ward, it could be an education zone like education zone A, education zone B, or education zone C. It can be an entire state, it can be a region like the North Central, the Northeast, it can be the Southeast and South, whatever the case may be, depending on how the coverage, how the researcher can cover in terms of geographical location. It can be inhibited by finances or some other limitations. Now, as we said, the second aspect of the scope will be the content scope. The content scope here establishes the subject boundaries. For example, a study in social studies could limit the scope to junior secondary education or upper basic, while a study on drug abuse could limit the scope amongst adolescents only, aging from a certain age to another age, and then you look at adolescents in terms of drug abuse for adults and so on. When those limitations are set, or boundaries are set, or categories are set, then it is referred to as the scope of the study. Many times the researcher will try to limit itself within. Now that we have come to the end of this part of the series where we look at the problem identification, you look at how you can get your research questions and hypothesis from the objectives. Now it is important that you go back to the slide that tells you about the delimitation of variables, where a number of variables are stated there: psychosocial, teaching methods, and cognitive variables, where you will go there, pick those variables and play with them. What we want you to do for Besavich Center is for you to pick those variables, get objectives of your study, get research questions, and get your hypothesis. You will see if they'll be one-to-one or they'll be otherwise, and see how you can apply them to your own study. Now, if you do that, let us hear from you in the comment section, and we'll be responding to all those responses, all the replies that you give us in. Before we do that, we will attend to them before we move to the next part of this lecture series. So thank you all very much once again. Welcome to Besavich Center.